It was a quiet Sunday morning in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but inside the sprawling halls of Family Worship Center, there was a tension so thick you could almost feel it pressing down on your chest. Donnie Swaggart, the fiery preacher and son of the late evangelist Jimmy Swaggart, wasn't in his usual bold, booming form. His eyes were red, the faint glisten of tears still clinging to the edges, his jaw tight as if holding back something he could barely contain. For years, Donnie had been the man on the pulpit, the one who would thunder about faith, sin, and salvation. But today, his words were softer, heavier, and they carried a weight that silenced even the most restless in the congregation. "It's not really a matter of if," he said, his voice cracking just enough to betray the storm inside, "but when." Those words lingered in the air like an unwelcome echo, and the room seemed to lean forward in unison. Donnie wasn't talking about revival or prophecy or the end times. He was talking about his mother, Frances Swaggart, the matriarch of the family, the woman who had stood beside his father for more than 6 decades, the voice and face of Sun Life Broadcasting Network, and to so many, the spiritual backbone of their ministry. For months now, whispers had floated through the pews and across social media. Frances, now in her late 80s, had been absent from broadcasts more often. When she did appear, sharp-eyed viewers noticed the subtle changes, a slower step, a softer voice, moments when her usually razor-sharp focus seemed to drift. On camera, the lighting was a little gentler, the cuts a little quicker, as if the production team was trying to protect her from the scrutiny of millions. But those close to the Swaggarts knew something was wrong. And now, Donnie's public words had cracked the dam wide open. The Swaggart name has always carried both reverence and controversy. Decades of preaching, television broadcasts, gospel music, and in international crusades built an empire that survived scandals most ministries would have crumbled under. Frances had been there through all of it. She was not just Jimmy's wife. She was his fiercest defender, his business partner, his counselor, and in many ways, his shield. People who worked at Sun Life say that Frances ran the ministry's behind-the-scenes operations with an iron will. She was the one who made sure bills were paid, broadcasts went out on time, and Jimmy's sometimes impulsive personality didn't derail the entire operation. She wasn't a preacher, but her presence was undeniable. And now, for the first time in living memory, that presence was fading. Donnie has always been close to his mother, even through his own messy personal history, divorces, remarriages, criticisms from the outside world. Frances never wavered in her support. She could be blunt, even harsh, but she never stopped being in his corner. In private moments, Donnie has admitted that his mother's faith and strength were often the only things that pulled him back from the edge. And so, watching her weaken was more than just a personal sorrow. It was like watching the foundation of his entire world begin to crack. In the weeks leading up to his emotional admission, Donnie had been spending more time at his mother's side. Neighbors and ministry staff reported seeing him arrive early in the mornings and leave late at night. Sometimes he would walk out to his car, sit in the driver's seat for several minutes with his head bowed, before finally turning the key and driving away. It was in those moments, they say, that the reality of what was coming seemed to hit him hardest. Frances had been in and out of medical care, and while the Swaggart family has kept details guarded, the signs were there: weight, loss, a noticeable fragility in her once commanding posture, and the absence of her voice from her daily Frances and Friends program on SBN. Inside the family, the conversations were more raw. Donnie and his cousin Gabriel, now a central figure in the ministry, had to talk about things no one wanted to face. What would happen to the network if Frances could no longer host her program? Who would make the financial decisions she had handled for decades? Would the audience, many of whom tuned in as much for her personality as for the content, still stay loyal? The Swaggart empire is as much a business as it is a ministry, and losing Frances would mean losing one of its most valuable anchors. But beyond the strategic concerns, Donnie's grief was intensely personal. In his sermons over the years, he has often referenced his mother, her wisdom, her no-nonsense faith, the way she could put even the most arrogant preacher in his place with a single sharp comment. She had been the constant in his life, the steadying force in a family that has weathered storms of public shame, private pain, and relentless media scrutiny. And now, he was facing the unthinkable, a future without her. When Donnie said it's not if, but when, it wasn't the kind of statement you make when you're clinging to hope. It was resignation, acceptance, a man staring down the inevitability of loss and trying to prepare himself, even though deep down he knew you can never truly prepare for that kind of goodbye. People in the congregation say they had never seen him look so vulnerable. His voice trembled. His usual commanding presence seemed to shrink, as though the weight of what he was saying was pressing down on him physically. In the days that followed, the Swaggart fan community erupted with speculation. Social media was filled with clips of Donnie's statement, often stripped of context, and captions like "Pray for Frances" and "The First Lady of SBN is fading." Longtime viewers began posting their favorite memories of her. Moments when she had laughed on air, moments when she had shut down a caller with her trademark bluntness, moments when she had shared something deeply personal about her walk with God. The ministry received an outpouring of messages from around the world, many offering prayers, some asking for updates, others simply thanking her for the years of service she had given. Privately, Donnie wrestled with guilt. He had spent so much of his life focused on ministry work, on preaching, on traveling, that there were years when he had been physically distant from his mother. Now, with her time running out, he wished for those days back. There were moments late at night when he would sit in her living room, the two of them not even speaking, just existing in the same space, and he would think, "I should have done this more." Frances, for her part, never voiced any regret. She had lived her life in service, to God, to her husband, to her son, and to the ministry they had built. She had endured public humiliation during the scandals of the 1980s and 90s, stood firm when donors fled, and somehow managed to keep the machine running when most people thought it would collapse. If she had any fear about the end, she kept it to herself. The truth is, Frances has always been a fighter. People close to the family say she's been through health scares before, and each time she bounced back stronger. But this time feels different. This time, even Donnie's optimism, that preacher's instinct to declare healing and victory over every situation, seems dimmed. When he speaks about her now, his eyes often drift downward, his voice softens, and there's a finality in his. The impact of her eventual passing will ripple far beyond the Swaggart household. For decades, Frances has been the face of a certain kind of American Pentecostalism, unapologetic, conservative, unafraid to speak bluntly about cultural issues. Her absence will leave a void not just in her family, but in the audience that has come to rely on her as a voice of conviction. The ministry will survive. It's too big, too well established not to. But it will never be quite the same. As for Donnie, the coming months will test him in ways nothing else has. Losing a parent is always shattering, but losing the one person who has been your constant defender, your advisor, and your anchor is something else entirely. He will have to find a way to carry her legacy forward while carving out his own identity in a ministry that has always been defined by his parents. Whether he likes it or not, the weight of leadership, both spiritual and practical, will fall more heavily on his shoulders. And yet, in the midst of all this, there is a quiet grace. Those who have seen Donnie with his mother in recent weeks describe moments of genuine tenderness, him adjusting her blanket during a cold snap, holding her hand during doctor's visits, laughing softly at an old story she told for the 100th time. These moments will become the memories he clings to when the one finally becomes now. For now, Frances is still here. She still smiles when Donnie walks into the room. She still corrects him when she thinks he's wrong about something. And he still listens. The end may be approaching, but there is still life to be lived, conversations to be had, prayers to be prayed. And maybe that's why Donnie's words hit so hard. Because they weren't just about loss. They were about love, about the unbreakable bond between a son and his mother, forged over a lifetime of triumphs and trials, and now facing its most difficult test. The day will come, and Donnie knows it, when he will have to step up to the pulpit and announce to the world that Frances Swaggart has gone home to be with the Lord. When that day comes, his voice will likely tremble again, but this time the tears will fall freely. And for millions of viewers, it will feel like losing a member of their own family. Until then, they pray. They watch, they wait, and Donnie, somewhere deep inside, counts the days, knowing that when is coming closer with each sunrise. Long before the cameras, before the stadiums filled with worshipers, before the scandals and the headlines, there was just a small Louisiana town and a young woman named Frances Anderson. She was ambitious, sharp-minded, and fiercely independent even in her teenage years. Traits that would define her for the rest of her life. People who knew her back then say she carried herself with a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. It was this strength that first caught the attention of a young Jimmy Swaggart. He was a budding musician and preacher, still years away from fame, but already carrying that unmistakable charisma. Frances wasn't immediately swept away by the romance of a preacher's life. She was practical, grounded. But she believed in Jimmy's calling, and perhaps more importantly, she believed in her own ability to stand beside him and make it work. From the moment they married, Frances's life became intertwined with Jimmy's ministry. She handled the finances when there was barely enough to cover gas for the old car they used to drive from revival to revival. She kept meticulous records of donations, knowing that transparency would matter if they were ever to grow. And she developed a knack for reading people, a skill that would prove invaluable in the years to come. She could spot a dishonest partner before Jimmy even realized there was a problem. She could sense when a member of their inner circle was growing disloyal. And she knew, instinctively, how to handle both fans and critics with equal firmness. By the time Donnie was born, the Swaggarts were already on the path to becoming a household name in Pentecostal circles. But Frances never let the glamour, such as it was, distract her from the work. She raised Donnie with the same mix of love and discipline she had brought to her marriage. In interviews over the years, Donnie has often said his mother was the toughest woman I ever knew, not in a cold way but in the sense that she didn't sugarcoat reality. If you were wrong, she told you. If you were being lazy, she told you. If you were about to make a mistake, she'd try to stop you, and if you didn't listen, she'd be there to pick you up after you fell. But she'd also remind you why you fell in the first place. It was this unwavering presence that shaped Donnie's own approach to life and ministry. Even in his rebellious years, and there were many, he knew his mother's opinion carried more weight than anyone else's. There were times he walked away from advice she gave, only to come back months or years later and admit she'd been right. Frances never gloated. She simply smiled and moved on. For her, being right wasn't about winning an argument. It was about keeping her family on the right path. As the ministry grew into a global operation, Frances's role became more public. She began appearing